Have you or your group organized last night's burnings?
We don't organize burnings, essentially. We organize people. If people burn, they burn. We passed the time where people are going to have to seek to be respectable. We passed that period altogether because none of us are going to be respectable. We never have been, we never will be. We are black, and we're proud of it.
In 1968, all over the planet, Paris, Prague, Mexico City, young people are screaming for change. Riots and bloodshed are the byproducts of revolutionary new ideas. But so is progress. In Vietnam, America is locked into a battle against communism. And at home, the battle lines are drawn between the status quo and young people who want something new. United under the banner of Black Power, groups such as the Black Panthers and the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee were taking their revolutionary new politics to the streets of America.
Riots are a part of the ugly atmosphere of our society now. We are trying desperately to find an alternative.
I don't give a crap what America says. America is just a part of humanity. And humanity is not ever going to make a change about anything without what? Some disruption, some actual disturbance. The attitude was that things were great while everybody was suffering.
Segregation wasn't just laws on the books. It was a state of mind. Black people understood what their place was, and they accepted that.
When we were growing up, if you were black, it meant you were in the problem. It did not mean that you had any opportunity to be not a part of the problem. So what we had was a community that did not want to advance past plantation era. And we had a community that had real needs.
In the latter part of the 60s, you began to see college students had returned to Memphis, bringing back with them the kind of energies and understandings they got while they were away.
In Atlanta, Stokely Carmichael was the chairman of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. After being arrested and beaten 27 times, he became disillusioned with peaceful resistance and took the nonviolent group into a more militant direction.
Let me say first that this march is a nonviolent expression of our determination to be free.
Mr. Carmichael, are you as committed to the nonviolent approach as Dr. King is?
No, I'm not.
Why aren't you?
No one in this country is asking the white community in the South to be nonviolent, and that in a sense is giving them a free license to go ahead and shoot us at will.
I loved Stokely. He was young, he was energetic. If you hit me, I should be able to hit you back without a whole lot of bullshit. I loved it.
Two college students, Charles Cabbage and Kobe Smith, met while studying in Atlanta. Carmichael's message of Black Power galvanized them into action.
So we fell into a fast friendship at that point. He wanted to do more things with SNCC and become involved in the movement.
Charles Cabbage, he was just a long, tall, handsome drink of water and had the prettiest eyes. And Kobe was like the genius kind of dude.
Kobe Smith was a graduate of Rhodes College. It was Southwestern at Memphis at the time. And you couldn't get in that school unless you had a high IQ. And being an African American, you had to be an exemplary high IQ student.
You got to have someone who can put the theory together. And I would say that Kobe is probably one of the best thinkers in terms of what the problem is, how it is, what the possible ways of working it out is. That's Kobe.
I knew about Black Power because it was on TV, but it wasn't a personal experience. It was what people were doing other places. You know, I was an American. I loved being an American, and so I was ready to defend America. I grew up watching John Wayne, identified with his patriotism. So serving in Vietnam was just an extension of that idea that I could serve my country, prove my manhood, and then the country would be glad that I did my part to defend it. I returned to Memphis as a disabled veteran. I was able to get a job at the Memphis Army Depot. I had my own apartment. I had my car. I was looking forward to living the American dream.
I was a student at Memphis State. I happened to have been the only one that was married at the time. So I had to spend a great deal of my time trying to figure out how we were going to eat. But as I talked with Kobe, as I talked with Cab, I began to see that I was going to be able to provide for them as I should.
When I left Atlanta, Cab was due to graduate Morehouse College. In fact, he was president of the senior class.
I didn't recognize the guy. Total Black Power. I'm like, who is this guy? Did he get brainwashed or what?
We're the people who went to school and we all of a sudden understood that, hey, this isn't gonna work. We can't march down the street every day and get people to do anything.
After Cab came home, the talk turned to Black Power. So for about 2-3 weeks, we debating every day, heated debates.
John was a gung-ho veteran of Vietnam. He wouldn't have thought of being against any established anything.
So this one particular night, we were going over to my apartment and I needed gas. So I stopped and the attendant, who's a white guy, he comes out and he tells me, I don't have a gas cap, but he's got one just like it. He can sell me. I'm like, that's my gas cap. So I'm irate, man. So I go call the police to get them to come because this guy's stolen my gas cap. When the police arrive, they brush past me and go over and talk to the white guy. And they ask him, what's the trouble? He tells them there is no trouble. That's it for as they're concerned. But in the meantime, this crowd starts together and the police call for backup. And they're talking about crowd control. This could be a riot. One of the officers tell us that we had to leave or they were going to arrest me. So some of these conversations that Cab and I had been having over the last couple of weeks about me not having rights and the Constitution doesn't apply to me and I was a fool for going to Vietnam and fighting to defend the country that wouldn't defend me. All of this is coming through my mind, so I'm like, arrest me then, because I'm not leaving until I get my cap. He was right. It had nothing to do with serving the country. I was a black man.
I hate to make America sound like it was not a free speech country, but it was not. Anytime you were near a white business and there were 2 or 3 Negroes together, the police had to come and protect whatever that establishment was.
Policemen would do some terrible things to the people that they would apprehend.
Police searched me like I was a man. I had to do that upside the car. They got happy up here, they got equally happy down here, and they all down here, and it wasn't nothing They would jack up the girls. I don't think they were searching to be searching. They just have a good feeling, call it a night, and go on about their business. And that was sad.
The preachers really were the ones who held sway. The old guard ministers were basically your fire and brimstone type.
But you did have individuals who moved into Memphis for various reasons, who found themselves working with young people in grassroots groups, and the community was suspicious of them.
Reverend Lawson was a very intelligent man. He had gotten a lot of people to become interested in resolving social problems.
This is about our unity, our togetherness, our standing, our being willing to face macing, marching, and anything else in order that out of that unity we will have a victory.
He came with a different philosophy to the city of Memphis because he had had experience in Nashville, having been involved in some of the organizations there that were protesting.
Reverend Lawson is a super intelligent individual, but he believed what he believed. No violence of any kind. This is going to be peaceful demonstrations. If you're going to get hit in the head, then you're going to get hit in the head, but you cannot strike back. You know, that didn't make much sense to us, but nevertheless, that's what he was saying.
Rev Lawson was the director of MAP South, a federally funded social organization whose mission was to help the poorest communities in South Memphis. Kobe, Cab, and John B. Smith were hired as field workers for the program.
We did a door-to-door survey. As a political science major, one of the things I learned was how to conduct these surveys, which included their income, the number of people in their households, whether they had indoor plumbing, whatever it was. You'd be surprised at some of these questions at that time.
I was still working at the depot, but I was working for MAP South too. Kay Pittman Black was a reporter from the Press Center. She wanted to know where would we work in, and so I said, well, you know, I could take you out and give you a tour of the area.
I only know one reporter, and that's Kay Pittman Black, and she used to come, to me it was like infiltrating something.
She met us on Trigon, Florida. And Trigon, Florida is one of those real old neighborhoods. So we gave her a guided tour to just show her the conditions that we were talking about. We showed her the outside water faucets, the outside toilets, and the broken out windows. And she was busy writing her story.
She would write articles, and it would start off all glowing and glittering, and then she would totally flip the script.
Well, the next day, the story comes out in the paper. Government worker has 2 jobs. The next thing we knew, I lost both my jobs. The story came out at a time when politicians all over the country were trying to make black power the issue as opposed to poverty and what we were doing in the community.
At the time, Dan Kirkendall was Memphis's congressman, and the word got to him that Reverend Lawson had involved this radical group. And so he began denouncing this practice and calling it into question.
But since it was a poverty program, MAP South needed people that were willing to go into the community and talk to people, knew how to do that, and that was what we were doing. So Lawson and the board defended Kobe and Cab being on the payroll. But of course, the political power out of Washington threatened to cut off MAP South's budget if they didn't get rid of Cab and Kobe.
After losing their jobs, they used their MAP South experience as the foundation for their own community effort called the Black Organizing Project. Its goal was to address issues like poverty, unemployment, and inadequate education. By creating programs to train young people for jobs and leading cleanup and improvement efforts in their neighborhoods.
We started the first free breakfast program they ever hit Memphis. We started that.
We even had programs where your children could come and get help with their homework and that kind of thing.
Lawson made sure that we knew all of the demographics of the Map South area. So once we start putting in the demographic information, we showed how we were entitled to get funding to work on these problems. And in those days, every neighborhood had its own gang. You could not just go from neighborhood to neighborhood walking through the community.
But talking to people in different areas gave us a means of starting to break down some of that animosity that existed between South Memphis and North Memphis, and Klondike against Douglas, and Lauderdale Sub against Riverside.
So we would explain to guys that we did not need to fight, that our real enemy was not the guy from another neighborhood. The real enemy was the power structure. And the power structure did not come talk to you themselves. They sent their thugs called the police. And so we went and organized a group of youngsters to go out with us who had the same kinds of problems. That became the Invader organization.
We used to meet at John's place over on Hanover. And most of the time was just spent there talking about what's going on, talking about what needed to be done. And, you know, little herbs, little cough syrup, you know. No one was like a heavy drinker.
At that time, there was this popular show on television called The Invaders,
which was about aliens who came in from outer space to planet Earth. And the reason that was significant is because the kinds of things we were talking about were as alien to our communities as if somebody had brought in these ideas from outer space.
I originally thought that they were just a militant group, having been influenced by groups out of Chicago and California, the Black Rangers, the Black Panthers, and of course Malcolm X.
To me, they were just cool dudes. They were like not outcasts, but they weren't cast in either. I know my mama, when I first came home and I had an Invader jacket on, she said, "Get out of there, them people gonna kill you." I kept wearing it anyway.
The leadership of the Invaders was folk heroes in the community because, you know, they stood for what was right, you know, and they walked it, you know, they walked the talk.
You had a generation that had come up that wasn't afraid. You had leadership who had developed programs and put forth things. See, people thought we were thugs in the street. That's a lie.
We go get the hose off the stove and get the pimps a hard time because revolutionaries and the revolutionary thoughts and pimping, it didn't go together. Pimps hate to see us coming.
We were talking to a lot of veterans who had gotten back from Vietnam. We talked to a lot of guys who had been in jail. We talked to students.
John B. Smith took me under his wing, and he taught me about organization, and he taught me about my responsibility to the community. You know, I'm a singer. I love to sing. I was with Stax and had a pretty successful career going when I was rudely interrupted by the draft.
They were just really hitting the charge when he got drafted. And when he came back, he wanted to be a part of the group. So I made him Minister of Defense.
I tried to walk a narrow line. I tried to play both sides. I wanted to continue to record for Stax, but I also wanted to be an invader.
On Bill Street, it was Palace Theater. They would have amateur hour. Each one of us would get $1 per singing, and when you got on the amateur hour and when you You know, singing down on Bill Street, all of a sudden you became very popular in the community.
Wine, you call him. I've been knowing him just about all my life. He was Willie Wine, the dancer. Yeah, could dance. Oh man, Willie Wine. They call him Sweet Willie Wine.
He was paralyzed in one arm, but Wine was one of those guys, he tried everything.
I couldn't pimp. Don't think the opportunity didn't present itself. It just didn't fit me. I was a shoplifter, one of the best. Of the things that I did, I was in the top 5. Of Bill Street and that kind of life that I found myself drifting into. That life will take you to the penitentiary. And then the movement was going on during that time. And it began to take effect on me in the prison. I began to study Stokely, Carmichael, Rap Brown, Che, socialism. I began to study everything at that point. And I'm saying to myself, this is the direction I want to go in. So I knew as soon as I got out, I was going to find the movement somewhere and somehow.
For what would have been our parents or elderly people, they would have been saying just what they did say. Don't rock the boat. They just wanted you to get an education, get a good degree, and you'd get a good job. We, of course, had now discovered there was no correlation between a good education and a good job. There were no good jobs for African Americans at that point in time.
The only place where blacks were well represented in the employment ranks was with the sanitation department, which did not have any whites carrying garbage. That was beneath a white man. That was not a white man's job.
Sanitation workers were the lowest paid workers in the city. They collected garbage in tubs. Liquid ran out of the tubs down on you. So when these guys got off work, they had to ride the bus smelling like garbage because they couldn't wash up. The white workers had locker rooms and showers, but the black workers couldn't go in the locker room. So they had to go home smelling like garbage.
With an average wage of $1.70 an hour, no benefits or workers' compensation, over 40% of sanitation workers could still qualify for welfare. Management positions were for whites only. Repeated requests to repair faulty equipment was ignored. Then, on February 1st, 2 sanitation workers were crushed to death in a trash compactor of a malfunctioning garbage truck.
Nearly 700 Memphis sanitation workers staged a 4-hour sit-in demonstration at City Hall today on this 11th day of the city's garbage strike. The workers vowed they would not leave until a city council committee produced a resolution recommending union recognition and a dues checkoff.
If the men do not return to work immediately, we will have no choice but to employ others to protect the public health.
The new mayor was Henry Lowe, and he was not going to allow the lowest paid workers in the city to force him to do anything. So he refused to even negotiate or talk to them about their grievances.
Henry Lowe, tall man, and at that time, your height determined how far you could go politically. If you had any hair and you were white, and you could sound like George Wallace or any of the hate-mongering white politicians, you had a future.
The sanitation workers wanted to organize a union, and Loeb's attitude toward the union was, these are my children. You can't come into my city and do anything for my children. He had this father mentality.
Well, of course, you know, the city did not want to recognize the union and therefore called the strike illegal.
I'd like to ask the question, what law would Mayor Loeb be violating to discuss the problems at hand?
Yes, we will discuss the problems as a man of the sanitation department if and when you men go back to work. Immediately. I mean now.
Lowe fired all of the sanitation workers and hired scabs to take their place. So the city was still picking up garbage every day. So as long as that was happening, there was no pressure on Loeb to negotiate.
Do you agree with the stand the mayor is taking in the sanitation dispute?
I do, definitely.
Why?
Well, I have just about come to the conclusion the more you pet somebody, the more you're going to have to pet them.
Police used riot control gas and nightsticks this afternoon to break up a group of striking garbage men.
As mayor of Memphis, I intend to do my duty with both fairness and firmness. Memphis will not tolerate civil disorder, and with the continuing help and support of all the people of this city, to whom I am most grateful for their many expressions of confidence, order will be maintained.
The community, of course, rallied to support the sanitation workers, and the invaders did the same.
They were having the sanitation workers arrested and harassed on their way to and from the picket line. So, at a meeting here in this very house, we decided that we would escort the sanitation workers to and from the picket lines. So we set up cadres to do that. I mean, this was a people's strike. The people in the community didn't have much, but when they gave, they came up with enough to help them be able to continue while the men were out on strike.
The center of activity was Claiborne Temple, which was on Hernando Street.
I became aware of the invaders by being at the meetings with the ministers, and the invaders was more organized than most of us. We were all together in the community.
A group called the Community on the Move for Equality, COM, took the lead for the community to help the union and the sanitation workers organize and sustain themselves during the strike. Reverend James Lawson, the same Lawson that was president of MAP South, became the director for COM.
When a public official orders a group of men to get back to work and then we'll talk, and treats them as though they are not men, that's a racist point of view. And no matter how you dress it up in terms of whether or not a union can organize, it's still racism. For at the heart of racism is the idea that a man is not a man, that a person is not a person. And so the racism has been obvious, it seems to me, from the very beginning.
Nightly, the workers would gather at Claiborne Temple. They would have meetings to keep them motivated, and we would go to those meetings. We thought the strategy they were using was never gonna force Loeb to meet their demand. So we were trying to talk to the steering committee about being more aggressive. One thing we wanted to do was to stop the trucks.
We wanted the strike to be run like a strike. The way that ran in the big cities was that if we put a picket line out in front of the sanitation lot, the trucks do not roll. And a lot of the ministers were afraid of that direct confrontation.
All of us had the same goal, but the invaders had a different method of wanting to accomplish those goals.
The foot soldiers, the ones like me, who picketed during the daytime and did other things in the evening, we would take those more aggressive actions.
If it meant destroying property, they had no reservation about that. That's what happened.
We set the garbage cans on fire, throw bricks at the garbage trucks.
In view of the fact employees on some of the sanitation trucks which are now operating have been threatened, the police department is taking the necessary action. Anyone who violates the laws will be dealt with without fear and without favor.
All of this Loeb blamed on strike supporters, which we were, but nobody ever got caught, so they couldn't prove it. But nevertheless, we were able to create the kind of chaos that made the city assign police cars to the garbage trucks on a daily basis, and it gave the sanitation workers that feeling that hey, something is happening here. We might really win this thing. We found an ally in Reverend Blackburn, and he made the proposal that the Invaders become a part of the steering committee so they could get some new ideas about what to do.
We never could have gotten through the civil rights movement without an awful lot of whites who came and said, wait a minute, that does not make sense.
One night, he called me up to speak to the committee to accept a more aggressive strategy because the workers wanted to do more. I told them we felt that if the truck rolling through your neighborhood, you can throw bricks at it. You know, you can throw bottles at it. Don't just let them roll through your neighborhood, pick up garbage unmolested. But Lawson and the rest of the leaders had no intention of really listening to us, you know, or taking our advice about anything. What they did was put us in charge of street activity again. So we started going to high schools, getting the students to turn out for marches.
It's really two things going on. There's a labor movement which involves the sanitation workers and how they can better their working conditions. And then there's a civil disturbance going on which involves the entire African American community, which says how can we better our living conditions, which of course they're one and the same.
I go to a meeting, Reverend Lawson is up talking to the sanitation workers. He told the workers they needed to decide what they were going to do when the money starts to run out in a couple of weeks as their bills keep piling up.
With few legal options in sight and support money dwindling, strike leaders needed to make a deal and fast. After an exhaustive negotiation, Lowe finally agreed to organize the union, but refuses to address the sanitation workers' grievances until they return to work.
So I'm sitting there, I realized they've just sold these people out because they were not going to get their grievances. And they had very, very simple grievances. They wanted to be able to use the shower, you know, simple grievances that the city was not willing to meet, even though they were willing to grant recognition of the union. They were willing to grant dues check-off, but that was for the union. They didn't want to give the workers anything. So I stood up from the floor and I just told them, you're trying to talk the workers into going back to work because of the problems you're having. The only thing you can do is stay out and fight. And the workers called for a vote as to whether or not they would go back to work. Of course, they voted not to go back to work. And when they come out, they were cheering, they were happy, they were glad that the strike continued. Of course, that was the end of our relationship with the steering committee.
You had certain black leaders, you know, was trying to control the strike. And part of the strikers, you know, saw the invaders' point of view when some of them saw the other side.
They started to move the meetings around. We couldn't find out anything about what was going on. We had to talk to the workers to find out that they were holding a secret meeting out in North Memphis at the Rubber Workers Union Hall. We followed them and they brought us to this building here. There were guards at the door who told us only union members could get in. But one of the workers that brought us out here said to come around to the side and I'll let you in through the back door. I entered through that door back there. The president of the union, Jerry Worth, was at the podium telling them that they were running out of money and they could not keep the strike going. So again, I shouted at him from the floor, you're doing the same thing that the preachers were doing. You're trying to talk these guys into going back to work. And I turned to the workers and started talking to them. It took a lot of courage for you to go out. Well, now it might take more than just marching. You might need to pick up some guns to fight for your right. Of course, several guys surrounded us and we was escorted out of the meeting. But the workers voted again to stay out on strike.
Lawson felt that we needed some outside force to come in to help bring the city together as far as blacks were concerned.
It was time to make the grandstand. And in order to have the grandstand, you had to have the Grand Marshal. And of course, at that time, the Grand Marshal civil rights in America was Dr. King.
As the civil rights movement progressed, Dr. King began to see that poverty was as big a source of oppression as race. In response, he was planning a massive Poor People's Campaign for the spring of 1968, where he would lead legions of supporters to Washington, D.C.
Now, I want some of you all to go to Washington with us, even if you have to bring a whole family. We are going to have in Washington facilities, and we're going to have food, and we are going to demand that the government do something about these conditions.
With plans to occupy the city, Dr. King hoped to bring the issues of poverty, racial discrimination, and peace in Vietnam to the forefront of the 1968 presidential campaign.
None of his staff even wanted him to come to Memphis. They didn't even think the cause, it was important because it was a part of the overall black cause. But it wasn't as large as the Poor People's Campaign.
Delighted I am to be in Memphis tonight, and to see you here in such large and enthusiastic numbers. You are reminding the nation that it is a crime for people to live in this rich nation and receive starvation wages.
After calling for a general work strike in the city, Dr. King promised to return to Memphis in 4 days to lead a mass nonviolent march in support of the sanitation workers. His presence would bring the strike into the national spotlight.
At one meeting just before the march, Reverend Lawson had gotten up and commented that they had received a bullet in the mail and that they suspected that it came from the invaders.
We were not the kind of people who would sit down and mail you anything. We would actually walk to your door and tell you exactly what we had to tell you. I don't know if we were not afraid or were we just too stupid to be afraid. But we would not have done that.
This was a very hard pill for us to swallow. Here was Reverend Lawson, who I consider my mentor and the man who brought me into the movement, accusing my organization of threatening them with a bullet in the mail. Now later on we discovered that this was all in the bag of tricks that the FBI commonly used to control organizations. This is not unlike J. Edgar Hoover sending letters to Martin King and to his wife asking Martin King to commit suicide.
FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover ordered the creation of a secret program called COINTELPRO. Their mission was to disrupt any person or group in America that the government deemed subversive. COINTELPRO used illegal tactics such as wiretapping, infiltration, false news reports, harassment, and in some cases, violence.
They maintained surveillance over me in particular, Charles Cabbage, John B. Smith, many of the guys who were critical to the invader leadership.
It is my understanding that the FBI paid folk at the local newspapers to create stories as a way of disenabling that group.
Teams of FBI agents known as Red Squads were assigned to local police offices in every major city in order to monitor civil rights leaders, anti-war activists, and black militant organizations.
When we became involved in the sanitation strike, that was the first time we really became aware that we were being surveilled, because we would see these people with these suits on, sitting up from the crib. We would be followed, going places. Guys in the suits showed up at my mother's house to let her know that I was playing a dangerous game and anything could happen to me. They started calling people we know, going to their houses, asking questions about us. You know, this guy shows up. He's a black guy and he's driving a Volkswagen station wagon. So he eventually introduced himself as Morrell McCullough. And so he'd give us a ride back to the crib, you know, or we needed to go someplace else, he'd give us a ride there. You know, so he literally turned into the Invaders' personal taxi cab.
I had information that they had planted someone in the Invaders.
McCullough was an undercover agent.
This thing was bigger than we imagined. And at the time, I couldn't imagine the FBI taking any notice to us. I was just that naive about politics and about, you know, J. Edgar Hoover's FBI.
But there were a lot of people who were sent out to find out what was happening, who the leaders were, who they should arrest if they arrested anyone. And so in any kind of oppressed community, you find that going on.
The night before the march, the Invaders met at my apartment to discuss our approach to the situation. What were we going to do regarding the march? And Cab and Colby decided they weren't going to participate.
We had a very informal set of networks that did bring us information. A part of that information was a young lady found my photograph and Cab's photograph in her boyfriend's wallet, who was a policeman, and she asked him why he had my picture. So he said if anything happens over these next few days, we have orders to shoot to kill these men. So, you know, that upset her very much, and she got on the phone, tell Kobe not to be there, tell Cabbage not to be there. So in the context of what was occurring, it was very important to order the Invaders off the street. However, many Invaders did go.
Several thousand Negro demonstrators are participating in this largest civil rights demonstration ever in Memphis, Tennessee. Many of the demonstrators are carrying the sign, "I am a man." They stretch out for several blocks. Police are on hand with about 600 officers. Almost the entire force is standing by here in case any trouble might break out.
Well, Dr. King was late. During the wait for him to come, people had been given these signs that say, "I'm a man," and they were mounted on sticks, which I thought was a bad idea, but that was the situation. By the time that Dr. King had arrived, the march and the line had been pushed forward all the way around the corner on Beale Street.
I was there, I was in the front of that march, and it was 25 across.
King was on the front line, and as a city official, I was on the second line right behind him.
We were on the sidewalk. We never got into the march, but there were spectators who came to see the march on the sidewalk that decided they wanted to get in the march. So the march no longer had any real definition going up the street. The way that Dr. King them usually handled their march, they try to keep the people about 3 feet apart, 5 abreast, and then they have marshals on the side to keep the people in the street separated from the people in the march. But that was no longer the case, and as we walked up the street, the march stopped.
The police had no intention of letting them go past Goldsmith. It was in the riot gear, gas mask, and had cordoned off that section.
When we peeked around that corner and saw all these officers, it looked like they were preparing for battle, and we were only prepared for a march.
So those in front of the march saw this contingent of police there and stopped.
That was forcing Dr. King into a crunch with the policemen who were preventing the march from going any further.
They hit a guy on the street corner by a window and busted a window. And all hell broke loose.
Chaos has just broken out downtown. That sound you just heard was the sound of a tear gas fired by a police officer in an attempt to thwart this unruly demonstration. We repeat, several Negro youths started running down Main Street, smashing windows as they ran. Police have formed a cordon across Main Street at this time in an attempt to at least calm the demonstration, which has gotten completely out of hand.
People were running and they were being beaten in the back ranks by the police.
And the guys that had signs with the sticks on them started fighting back. Some were fighting with the police, the other was breaking windows.
Yeah, I was in that crowd. And I was picking up bricks and whatever I could throw at the police.
There was total panic. People were running in all kinds of directions.
Harold Middlebrook and Reverend Lawson, I think, sneaked Dr. King off into a car and drove him back to the Rivermont.
So they pushed us all the way back to Claiborne Temple. And at Claiborne Temple, we got the women and children and let them go inside of the church.
As I walked in one side door into the church, the police shot tear gas canisters through the stained glass windows on the other side.
The police came, kicked the door down, tear gassed everybody in there, beat up everybody on the corner, as well as invaders and everybody else, old women. It was terrible. It was terrible.
Invaders ain't done 15 cents of the planning of the violence. Most of the violence being planned by who? Because white America and white legal America did not want to see Martin Luther King perform this poor people's campaign. They're the ones who say, I'll tell you what, we're going to disrupt everything he does wherever he goes. We're going to cause a problem. What does it take to start a riot?
Larry Payne, a black 16-year-old from South Memphis, was shot and killed by Memphis police. 62 others were injured and over 200 arrested.
When I got back to the crib, we turned on the TV and every news station was saying the same thing. The invaders had caused the riot. The invaders were nothing but gangsters and young hoodlums and thugs looking for trouble. We couldn't believe it. The police said the reason the march was stopped up on Main Street was because some people started breaking windows down around 3rd and Beale. And those people were said to be invaders. But we were not involved in that at all like everyone else. We were trying to get out of the panic.
We weren't preaching nonviolence. We were preaching self-defense. And so we were easy mark for people to try to blame. But let's be real. Why would we? There was nothing for us to gain by doing that.
Now we saw, as we tried to move throughout the city, the violence by some of the young people who have been taught extremely well by this society and who therefore cannot hear the message of nonviolence that many of us have been insisting upon.
When the march, which was to be permitted, had it remained orderly, degenerated into a riot, abandoned by its leaders, the police, with my full sanction, took the necessary action to restore law and order.
I would like to add that since 11:30 this morning, when this riot broke out, that the Memphis Police Department moved in order to maintain law and order in the city of Memphis. We know that a group of young people have been threatening to take a riot action for some time, and we have been on top of that situation. We know who these individuals were, and of course we did ask for the National Guard at 11:32 this morning, which was only 2 minutes after the riot did take place.
Tennessee National Guardsmen flood downtown Memphis. Within minutes, downtown is under martial law. Additional guardsmen begin working their way into the all-black neighborhoods of North and South Memphis, effectively occupying the majority of Memphis's black population.
This community has had it. We had 4,000 troopers called in here. We had 8,000 on the alert. Yesterday there were 600 cops downtown. The city of Memphis has willfully, and I mean willfully and vagrantly, attacked the black community. If Dr. King is going to come in here, he's going to have to come in here and analyze the situation and meet the needs of black people here.
And if he doesn't?
If he doesn't, the same thing will happen to him everywhere he goes that happened here in Memphis.
Which is that his nonviolent demonstrations will be turned violent by people such as
Well,
yourself?
I didn't see that we turned anything violent. The police played the key roles. Memphis is a very tense place. People don't seem to realize this. And when we tell this to the fine city fathers, all they can answer with is 4,000 National Guardsmen and giving the cops more equipment.
Cab, Izzy, and myself, we all went to the River Mont. Because he sent for us. He actually sent for us. And we go in the room. Dr. King, he was in his bedroom. And of course, when we go sit in the living room, everybody, and I can't think of who all was there, but everybody starts saying, "Oh, you all ought to be ashamed of yourselves." Well, we looking at the people who talking to us like, y'all must be idiots. What makes y'all think that we did anything? Those people were addressed in a manner of, y'all are nobody. Quit talking to us and shut up. We came to see Dr. King. Abernathy was there. And as we were having this sort of heated discussion, out walks Dr. King. It's sort of like a person comes into the room and all of a sudden you see that this is no time for shenanigans. Here is a man who is very serious about what he is doing. It's like everything in the room, everything just became still. You know, he, of course, talked to Cab like you and I talk. You know, you're my old student. I mean, we went to school together, Cab. But what is the problem here? Why would you mess up, right? But Cab wanted Dr. King to clearly understand we didn't do anything. It was your staff of people who had you come into the city who told you or convinced you or whatever the case was that it was going to be a peaceful march. The black leadership was not talking to young black individuals. They were only talking to who? They were talking to the various church leaders who knew, of course, your church congregation isn't going to do anything. We knew that. But you never talk to your church congregation's children.
The fact that we were a part of the community effort was totally new to him. So in explaining the kind of role we had been playing with strikers, doing the daily marches and turning out the schools, Dr. King realized that we had been a part of the strike and we were not just some people who showed up to cause trouble. Cab explained to him about our program that we were trying to get funded, and he told Cab that he was going to come back to Memphis for a second march, and he wanted the Invaders to participate in that second march as marshals, and if we agreed to do that, Dr. King would help us find funding for our program.
Paul, have you met with this one?
Well, I don't want to call names, but I met with the leaders of the young militant organization here in Memphis.
They take the responsibility for what happened yesterday?
Well, not in the sense that they came to say that they organized it, no. But they made it very clear that they knew something was going to happen. We don't have any problem with many of the young militants who talk in terms of violence. Our method is to communicate with them. I have just communicated with some of them this morning, and I found that their problem was that there was a breakdown in communication between them and the leadership of the campaign here. And those men were the first one to say to me that they were certainly willing to engage in a campaign of tactical nonviolence to deal with the issue here in Memphis. If we had known that in advance, It would have been just a matter of meeting with them, giving them a sense of voice, and they would have been the first ones to be the marshals.
Does that mean there will be no more violence?
What's that?
Does that mean there will be no more violence in Memphis?
Well, I can't guarantee that there will be no more violence after we leave and go to Washington. I'm simply saying that we are going to have a nonviolent demonstration here with the young black militants who have been in an organizing process. The fact is that injustice is the problem, and we've got to see that violence is already in our society. The violence of poverty, the violence of slums, the violence of inferior education. And this psychological and spiritual violence, I would say, is much worse at many points than the external physical violence that comes into being as a result of this psychological and spiritual violence. Now, we are trying to find an answer to the violence that is a day-to-day reality in our society and a day-to-day reality in the life of every black man and every poor person in our country.
Understanding the role of the black bourgeoisie, which is what I saw Dr. King and Lawson them as, I didn't have any trust for them. What I was interested in was trying to get it straightened out about the fact that we didn't start the riot.
But Cab was concerned about it because, you know, he had pledged the Invaders' support.
After we finished discussing the meeting with Dr. King and listening to the news, people were telling us about what the police were doing and that we were #1 on their hit list. So we decided to leave the apartment and get rooms at the Lorraine Motel, the only black-owned motel in the city. So we hung out there for 3 or 4 days, and we stayed out of sight until Dr. King returned.
Memphis city officials went into federal court again today to try to prevent a Negro mass march on Monday. The Ku Klux Klan reportedly is planning a countermarch, and police testified they'll be unable to prevent violence.
At this time, we are committed to having another massive demonstration around this issue.
The city obtained a court injunction. Would you obey it and not march?
I'd have to cross that bridge when we come to it. I don't know exactly what we would do in that case. We have our legal advisors with us, and then, of course, we have our conscience to live with. And it's a question of whether we would go on the basis of what we think is a basic constitutional right.
What have your aides told you about the cooperation that has been arranged with the young people?
They've been talking with various groups, and I've gotten some very encouraging reports from them. They have talked with these groups, and these groups have committed themselves to cooperation and committed themselves to following the guidelines set forth of nonviolence and what have you.
The police, they were only doing their job. But if their job requires that they stick a shotgun in the midsection of a 17-year-old boy who has his hands over his head and is saying, "Don't shoot," then we need...
We've got some difficult days ahead. But it really doesn't matter with me now. I just want to do God's will. And He's allowed me to go up to the mountain. And I've looked over and I've seen the promised land. I may not get there with you, but I want you to know tonight that we as a people will get to the promised land. So I'm happy tonight. I'm not worried about anything. I'm not fearing any man. Mine eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the
Lord. The morning of the 4th, we met with Dr. King at the Lorraine. Everybody wanted to see what he was expecting from the Invaders. We knocked on his door, and he invited us in. The room was a double, so Cab and I sat on one bed, facing Dr. King, who was sitting on the other bed, and we began to explain our dilemma, the problem we were having. That was the problem of trust. What could he do that would allow us to have confidence SCLC would keep its word? To our surprise, Dr. King began to explain to us the dilemma he was having, which we were totally unaware of. First of all, he explained to us the problem he was having with J. Edgar Hoover. He said that when he met with J. Edgar Hoover in his office, he thought that it was just a matter of miscommunication, that they could actually come to a meeting of the mind. But once he met with him, he realized that Hoover was out to destroy him. J. Edgar Hoover said Dr. King was the most dangerous man in America, and he would do whatever he could to stop him. Letters to his wife and letters to the press, all trying to destroy his reputation. Then he started to tell us about the problems that he was having within his organization of SCLC. He felt that most of what they had done to that point in terms of successes had taken place in the South, and trying to go into the North, they had always had problems.
I can assure you that the hatred and the hostility here are really deeper than what I've seen in Alabama and Mississippi.
His solution was he wanted the Invaders to communicate with other Black Power organizations and recruit them to become a part of the Poor People's Campaign.
Dr. King wanted the Invaders and the Black Egyptians and the warlords. He wanted to meet with them and understand them, and then take the cream of the crop and put it into a training program, which was nonviolent.
This he saw as an opportunity to build a relationship with Black Power groups in every major city: St. Louis, Chicago, Cleveland, Philadelphia, New York. They were all over. At one point, he reached over and put his hand on my knee. That was when he explained to us just how important it was that we understood the pivotal role that we could play. And I could feel he was genuine. After that conversation, when we get back to the crib, I go in, I open the door, I turn on the TV, and there it is. Dr. King has been assassinated.
Martin Luther King Jr. was killed tonight in Memphis, Tennessee, shot in the face as he stood alone on the balcony of his hotel room.
We thought that we were in greater danger than Dr. King was. We never would have imagined that anyone would ever assassinate Dr. King.
King's death sparked a wave of riots across the country. More than 100 cities up in flames. President Johnson dispatches federal troops, and Attorney General Ramsey Clark is sent to Memphis to restore order.
At the time that Dr. King was shot, I just got back into Memphis for the first time since being in the penitentiary. I went to Lewis's funeral home before he shipped his body away, and I looked at him. It was at that point that I made a total commitment to the movement.
Here in Memphis, police tonight are still looking for the assassin of Dr. Martin Luther King. They do have a few suspects, but they say right now that they don't think they have the man who did it. Reports of incidents are still coming in. There's still fear of violence. There is a lot of fear in Memphis tonight. Perhaps one of the ironies that Dr. King was killed here is that his last few days were spent trying to negotiate with the militants in Memphis and elsewhere, hoping to find some agreement
some way that they could all work together. Yesterday, he met with militants and afterwards was encouraged, felt that they had found a way. What will happen to that effort now, no one knows.
But that's the price you pay to bring freedom, justice, and equality to a democratic society and get blamed as the enemy when you're trying to bring peace. All he was trying to do was tell people the truth. And when you tell the truth in an untruthful world, you might lose your life.
After the assassination, we felt like we had a target on our back. We figured, like the march, we were going to get blamed. So we laid low as much as we could. We didn't go out looting or any of that because it was a possibility that you could lose your life.
On April 8th, 4 days after the assassination, Coretta Scott King led a mass march throughout downtown Memphis in tribute to Dr. King and in support of the striking sanitation workers. There were estimates that as many as 40,000 people participated in the march. The Invaders worked with the ministers and the SCLC to provide security as marshals. There was no disruption, violence, or rioting.
This hour, to me, represents much more than just a time to eulogize. His campaign for the poor must go on.
I really believe that economic power for poor people was one of the main reasons that Dr. King got assassinated. He was talking about poor people power, poor people campaign.
By April 16th, Undersecretary of Labor James Reynolds is able to broker an agreement between the striking sanitation workers and the city. The workers' pay would be raised, their union recognized, and black and white sanitation workers will be treated equally.
All in favor of the recommendation, let it be known by saying aye. I want to say we've been agreed many times, but I presume that this was all in the making of the fight. We lost many things, but we stayed and we got the victory.
We were still hiding out from the police. I'd come down to Beale Street to get something to eat and not meet wine. He had just gotten out of jail, and like myself and many others, he had gone through a catharsis. And he saw himself differently, and he wanted to do something differently. So he told me he wanted to be an invader.
I had begun to learn that Charles Cabbage and John Smith had met with Dr. King, what Dr. King wanted the invaders to do. I said, I can do this, I can make this happen. I said, John, let me become a member of the Invaders, let me be the prime minister, and I'll go to Washington, D.C., and I'll help keep the peace as it relates to Poor People's Campaign.
We had made a promise to Dr. King that we were gonna support his Poor People's Campaign. We had given our word.
Fulfilling their promise to Dr. King, John B. Smith sends a group of invaders, led by Sweet Willie Wine, to help provide security for the Poor People's Campaign.
We became that symbol of militancy that was able to work with SCLC based on what Dr. King said in terms of being able to communicate with the militant groups.
I've always admired Wayne because I know about the sleepless nights. I know about trying to put together something that looks like it can't go together.
May 21st, 1968, thousands of supporters converged on the National Mall and set up a camp they called Resurrection City. The people were demanding economic and human rights for all poor people regardless of race.
The FBI says it has captured a man that it suspects of shooting Dr. King. How do you feel about that?
That's their thing. They said that they got the man that did it. I don't believe they got him because I live in Memphis. And if it was really on the case, they'd caught the man before he even left Memphis. But don't mean just because he's dead that it's going to stop progress.
It's been our experience that Congress and this nation doesn't really move until their own self-interest is threatened and until, in fact, they begin to share some of the problems of the poor.
It rained. And, oh my God, we straight up lived in tents. And the best we could do for the rain was put down floorboards and a mattress. And if it rained, your mattress got wet, the floorboards wet. And the whole thing was to try to show the nation how poor people live.
Their encampment on the National Mall lasted 6 weeks when, on June 20th, a force of 1,000 police officers evicted the protesters. In the chaos that followed, many were stranded in Washington. Sweet Willie Wine and the Invaders arranged rides for hundreds of people to return home.
Martin had got assassinated, and I think everybody kind of trying to figure this thing out, and how to go forward. We were still organized somewhat, but kind of fragmented.
As 1968 unfolded, the evening news broadcasted images of a country caught in the midst of widespread social upheaval. May of 1968 was the deadliest month of the entire Vietnam War. 2,169 Americans were killed, bringing the death toll to 24,088.
A lot of members of the Invaders were being arrested and then given the option, you can go to jail or you can go to Vietnam.
Charles Cabbage was arrested for check fraud and draft evasion and sentenced to 4.5 years in prison. John B. Smith was arrested on a riot charge in connection with a disturbance at Carver High School in his Riverside neighborhood of South Memphis and sentenced to 5 years in state prison.
At the time of the sanitation workers' strike, 39 invaders or so were in jail. Well, we could not raise enough money to get them bonded out. We could not raise enough money to keep the lawyers going to represent them in court. If you are a young man in jail on a charge that is often trumped up, you have no real appreciation for the subtleties involved in your receiving a fair trial.
John Gary Williams was involved in a confrontation with authorities that ended in the shooting of a policeman. For not pulling the trigger, he received 2.5 years.
I saw them as a group who were really struggling to bring about a change. I respected that because I knew them before the heat started.
Calvin, Charles, John B., Maurice, all of us, James Phillips, Edwina Harrell, all these people would have been leaders anyway in the community, even segregated.
But after they were released from jail, we were able to accomplish some of the things that they were fighting for. Better jobs, better housing, more blacks were now being elected and actually appointed to political position. All of this was fulfillment of what they were really struggling for.
You have to understand that we were making it up as we went along. It was just black people taking control of their community.
For the invaders to have gotten every neighborhood, young people, involved in a movement, that in itself is something to look at and be amazed at and try to figure out what was going on. Because the invaders went north, south, east, and west at any time. And people were proud to say that. Young people.
I'm a firm believer that if we brought out the same signs that we had in '68, they could apply. We need more housing. What happened to them? We need more jobs. What happened to them? Right now, if poor people got together, it would be a lot of power. Mine was like a fever. It burned on the inside of me. I got to do something. Joining the Invaders, I did something. And to me, we did well.
I got news for you, baby.